Hey, what is going on, everybody? I am so excited to be back to be creating some video content for you guys. I know I've kind of dropped the ball on my YouTube channel over the last 5 months, but it was for a good reason. Got a promotion at my day job. Things were moving good pretty fastly there, so I just had to get that whole situation figured out. Get comfortable in my new role, and then I was just ready to dive right back into this upcoming season. We are 50 days away as of this recording. By the time this should come out and you guys watch this, I believe we'll be about 49 days away. So it's just around the corner. I'm very excited. So I definitely want to start creating my content again on my YouTube channel, and I'm starting it off like I did last year for those that followed me from the beginning of this channel, where I talk about one of my favorite topics in fantasy football, which is going to be about the year three wide receivers. People that know me, it's something I do every summer. It's something I've always kind of done, targeting year three wide receivers as a strategy over my whole fantasy football playing career. And then as I got into content creation, I started with some articles, and then last year was my first time I did it on video, and I just want to continue that, and we're gonna rock with that today. So yeah, why don't I just go ahead and get into this now? If you guys are familiar with the strategy, if it's something that you maybe have never heard of, but the thing is, with most wide receivers, it can take some time. Now, wide receivers are definitely coming in as rookies, more prepared, better route runners than they were in the past. I will say that. But at the end of the day, some of these rookie wide receivers, they might hit a wall at some point. Maybe not a Jamar Chase, who was a stud as a rookie last year, even though he sat out for a year. But sometimes it does take some guys, a couple years just to get acclimated to the NFL speed, get their route running ability down, get their coverage recognition ability down, and where they can fully become the wide receiver that their ceiling can be. And also, it helps that they're in the same system for about 3 years if they're lucky enough, or where they get drafted, the coaching staff is able to be there for the majority of the first part of their career. And there's multiple instances where this happens. I'm about to dive into a few examples from the past 3 years, but one that comes to my mind too, guys, is that Nelson Aguilar, right? He's not like the greatest wide receiver right now, but everybody wanted to write him off as a bust, as a first-round pick in his first 2 years, and then he blew up and he was a fantasy relevant player in year three. So things like that happen. Wide receivers can be labeled as bust their first 2 years, and then for whatever reason, year three, everything comes together. Or there's guys like the three I'm about to go into, where they just steadily got better every season, and then they just blow up. They blew up in their production as far as stats. So why don't we just go ahead and look at the examples I put together from the last 3 years, starting back in 2019. Look at Chris Godwin's gradual increase in production. In year one, he had the 55 targets, 34 receptions, 525 receiving yards, a touchdown, and he had that in 16 games. And then in year two, he had 95 targets, 59 receptions, he had 842 yards and 7 touchdowns. And then look at what he did. He was in the system more. He was ready to become a better player in year three. He saw 121 targets, 86 receptions, 1,333 yards, and 9 touchdowns in 14 games, too. He didn't even play those extra 2 games, so his stats could have even been better if he had the 2 games that he logged in year three, because this was back when it was a 16-game schedule, of course. And then taking a look at Calvin Ridley. Now, I understand he's not going to be playing this year for a reason, but taking a look at his first 3 years in the league, year one and year two are really similar when you look at it, right? Year one, he had 92 targets. Year two, 93, 63 receptions, 821 yards, 866 yards, 10 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns in year two. And then you look at year three, look at all those target increase that he had. He had 143 targets, 90 receptions, 1,374 yards, and 9 touchdowns, and he did that all in 15 games. So again, that's another example where you get like a first. These guys are, well, I know Chris Godwin's a day 2 pick, but Calvin Ridley, for example, he was a first round pick, and that was a guy that was able to come in, kind of be producing, and then year three, he was acclimated in the system. He had chemistry with Matt Ryan, and he had a huge year in his third season in the NFL. Now, looking at my last example from last year, now I do want to reiterate, this main topic is the guy being better as a wide receiver when he is in year 3. Now, we all kind of know Deebo Samuel's not just your typical wide receiver. He has rushing stats, but the stats I'm providing you, these are strictly only receiving stats, and you can see where he improved as a wide receiver. His rookie year, he had the 81 targets, 57 receptions, 802 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, year 2, he did get hurt. He only played in 7 games. In those 7 games, he had 44 targets, 33 receptions, 391 yards, and that 1 touchdown. And then last year, he blew up, and now he's looking to get his payday, right? He had the 100 just as a receiver, not counting his rushing stats, just as a wide receiver. He had 121 targets, 77 receptions, 1,406 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So, the proof is in the pudding when you look at this stuff. Now, does everybody, have an increase in year 3? No, but you can kind of find guys. Who's another guy that had a year 3 boom last year? Hunter Renfrow, for example. So guys can steadily get better and blow up, and there's always going to be, at least I believe, in my opinion, I think you get depending on the size of the class, you're going to find 3 to 4 guys, I think, that see an increase, if not more, in production as far as the upper echelon talent. And then you're going to see guys that are maybe they were kind of role players, but now they're kind of they weren't fantasy relevant, but then that's the year 3, they kind of put it together, and they're maybe they're more of you're a bench player, wide receiver 3 type of guy in your roster. And that's what I look for when I start to target my wide receivers in NFL drafts, in fantasy football drafts. And this year there are a lot of year 3 wide receivers. So what you're going to get out of this year's video, I'm going to give you the top 5 guys I want on my fantasy football roster. I want to do whatever I can to get them. I'm going to tell you the next tier after that is guys I'm willing to use a draft selection. So if I'm debating between 2 wide receivers, I'm probably going to lean towards one of these year 3 wide receivers, just depending on where we're in the draft. So one of those guys is maybe I'll be talking about maybe a little too rich for me right now at this point. And then my last section is just guys to watch to see if their roles unfold. These are going to be guys that you probably aren't going to draft unless you're in a 14 plus team league draft, but maybe these are guys you watch during preseason, see if maybe they have a role. Maybe guys get hurt, guys get traded, so more opportunities present themselves, because as I always say in my fantasy football videos, volume is king and opportunity is king. So there are guys on this list that I think are better players, but I have the other guy that I think he's a better player and ranked higher than him just because I like his situation a lot better. So why don't I go ahead and get into this? My number 1 wide receiver that I want to own on my fantasy football roster this year, it's going to be Justin Jefferson. This is a pretty simple pick. He had to get a little slow start, his first 2 games, and then he kind of just took over the position, has been immediately a producer. Year 1, he had the 125 targets, 88 receptions, 1,400 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Last year, he had 167 targets, 108 receptions, 1,616 yards, and he had the 10 touchdowns. And obviously, outside of Justin Jefferson's talent, you kind of wondered where he will see the uptick in production. But I will say this, you got Kevin O'Connell. He's the former Rams offensive coordinator coming over. So you got to see what Cooper Kupp did last year within that Rams offense. So you got to imagine Justin Jefferson's going to kind of be able to put up that type of production underneath Kevin McConnell. And then what you like too is they just have Adam Thielen, who's an older veteran at this point. So he's at the back end of his career. And another guy I'm actually going to bring up here later on, KJ Osborne. But other than that, they got Emir Smith-Marchette. I probably butchered his name, who might kind of have a small role. But other than that, they really didn't bring anybody that's going to cut in to Justin Jefferson's targets. So I just feel like Justin Jefferson is a safe pick, and I think he's in more of a pass-friendly offense than what he was over the last 2 years. So that's why Justin Jefferson is my number 1 year 3 wide receiver I want on my roster. Number 2, I'm going with CeeDee Lamb from the Dallas Cowboys. Taking a look at his rookie year, he had 111 targets, 74 receptions, 935 yards, 5 touchdowns. He did that in 16 games. And then last year, he had 120 targets, 79 receptions, 1,102 yards, and the 6 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb to me right now, after I was doing the kind of my research into this and kind of looking at these rosters over the summer, is I think he's gonna. I think honestly, more we get closer to the season, he might be the wide receiver that's gonna blow up and help people win championships this year. I believe it. You see Amari Cooper left to the Browns, so that pushes him up to be the lead guy in that wide receiver corps. So not only that's gonna help him see more targets, I definitely could see him getting over at least to 100 receptions or more. I think he can get easily to double-digit touchdowns, and probably obviously see more of an increase in his yardage total. If there was a guy that's going to be in my example, like I did earlier in this video, next year, I think it's going to be CeeDee Lamb. So the more I get closer to my drafts, the more I want CeeDee Lamb on my fantasy football roster. Moving on to number 3. On my list, I'm going with Jerry Jeudy. Now, Jerry Jeudy is one of those guys where I kind of, whenever I did my rankings in this class, I kind of debated between him and CD, like flipped and forth. I couldn't remember, but whatever reason, I like Jerry Jeudy the most between the two. But Jerry Jeudy is dealing with competition, right, in his wide receiver room there in Denver. But really quick, though, taking a look at what he's done thus far in his career. His rookie year, he had 113 targets, 52 receptions, 856 yards, and he had the 3 touchdowns in the 16 games. Now, last year, he was banged up throughout the season. He only played in 10 games. He only had 56 targets, 38 receptions, 467 yards. Now, they are completely different players, but go back to the example too. Don't let those injuries in a down sophomore slump like Deebo Samuel had in his year 2 to push you away from him and make you regret that you didn't draft him. So I think Jerry Jeudy, you can get him at a value where he's going to be able to be in that wide receiver 2, possibly wide receiver 1 range if he can have that year 3 boom, especially with Russell Wilson. So you gotta love the situation that he's in. He's with one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Now, the biggest, I want to say the biggest issue, I guess the one thing that kind of holds you back, with, like I said, is volume and opportunity. So you got to think that wide receiver room there in Denver. They got Tim Patrick there. Cortland Sutton, and another guy I'm going to mention later, KJ Hamler. Then they got Albert O as a tight end, and they also drafted Greg Dulcich in the draft as a tight end as well. So, and then they got Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon. So yeah, there's going to be plenty of mouths to feed. But I kind of looked where Russell Wilson just came from, which was with Seattle. And over the last 3 years, he was able to help give Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf production, right? So I kind of view like that's Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, right? So I think Jerry Judy's kind of set to have a definitely an uptick in production as long as he remains on the field. And he's a guy I think I can get at a value this year where more people are going to overlook him, and then you're going to be able to find a guy that's at your wide receiver 2 spot. Maybe you draft him as a wide receiver 3 or possibly 4, a guy on your bench you can slide in at some point. Now, moving on to my number 4. This is a guy that has a great opportunity to definitely see a huge year 3 boom. It's Michael Pittman Jr. from the Indianapolis Colts. Rookie season, he had 61 targets, 40 receptions, 503 yards, and a touchdown in 8 games. And then year 2 last year, he definitely had solid uptick in production. So he had the 129 yards, 88 receptions, 129 targets, 88 receptions, 1,082 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 17 games this last year. And the reason why I definitely want Michael Pittman on my team, outside of being a Colts homer, is he basically has all the opportunity he's going to see. The Colts wide receiver room, it's Michael Pittman and I wouldn't call them a bunch of other guys, but it's a group of guys that are going to be battling for targets and snaps to go along with Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is the number 1 wide receiver in Indianapolis, but there isn't the Colts obviously want Alec Pierce to be that number 2 guy in the room, but there is no clear-cut number, like this is the for sure number 2 guy entering training camp this year. So that gives all the opportunity for Michael Pittman to see more targets, go over 100 receptions, get more yards, and definitely get to double-digit touchdowns. Based on what I've been hearing, he's been developing nice chemistry with Matt Ryan. That's another thing. he's in a better quarterback situation. Matt Ryan is more accurate than Carson Wentz is. He's got better timing. So that's going to present him better targets too, where he can convert more of those targets that he saw last year from Wentz into receptions, which helps him get more stats. So, I mean, Michael Pittman Jr., if this kid can hit his ceiling, and if the Colts don't either sign or trade for another wide receiver, or then they get kind of rely on the other guys to kind of just do their part while Michael's the number one guy. I mean, you're talking about a guy that can get up to like a wide receiver one if everything comes together nicely for Pittman Jr. And then my final the top 5 list is going to be my man T. Higgins. I've been a fan of this guy for a while, since he was at Clemson. And he's entering year 3 with one of the best young quarterbacks in the game, Joe Burrow. So taking a look at his rookie year, I mean, basically, if you look at his rookie and his sophomore year, they're basically the same, right? Rookie year, 108 targets. Year 2, 110. Year 1, 67 receptions. Year 2, 74. So he saw 7 more receptions. 908 yards, but he did go over 1,000 yards last year, and he had 6 touchdowns in both years. Now, last year he did only play in 14 games, so you got to keep that in mind too. An extra couple games, a little bit more receptions, more yardage, maybe he gets to 8 touchdowns, right? Now this year I think he's set to have that year 3 boom, not only because I believe in his talent. I think he's tied to one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and I think with the presence of Jamar Chase, that's going to help him not have to see any type of double teams. Maybe that Michael Pittman Jr. might have the better opportunity, but he's also going to maybe see more double teams, right? T. Higgins, he's got Jamar Chase. They also got Tyler Boyd as well. But I just see this as a big year for T. Higgins, where I could see him being the most productive wide receiver in that room, where he sees, maybe he sees a slight uptick in targets, but I think he ends up converting more of his targets into receptions this year with Joe. And then also I think this is the year he's going to hit double-digit touchdowns as well. And as a big fan as I am in T, I think he's a guy for sure, if I'm debating between him and another guy, I'm going to go with the year 3 guy in T. Higgins. So yeah, that's my top 5 guys I want to see on my roster this year that are year 3 wide receivers: Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Michael Pittman Jr., and T. Higgins. Now, the next section, now I don't have the stats and everything. You guys can definitely feel free to go out there and dive in there. I'm just going to kind of run down the names and kind of give you my thoughts on them as we inch closer to this upcoming fantasy season, and as we inch closer to more of the redrafts, more of when everybody kind of starts to dive in to the NFL season. So my number 1 guy is not number 1 guy, but these are the guys I'm willing to use a draft selection. Now, I'm going to go ahead and admit, I debated between Gabriel Davis and T. Higgins in my number 5 spot. But I don't know. I just bumped down Gabriel Davis because I think T's a bit better player. I'm more of a T fan, but I do like what Gabriel Davis offers this year. He's in a prime situation, tied with one of the best young quarterbacks. What you got to love about this is it's just Stephon Diggs, and he has a road to him being the second wide receiver in a pass-happy offense with Josh Allen. Now, there's a slight worry. What does this offense look underneath Brian Daboll? They are going to have a new offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey this year. I assume they're going to translate most of what they did last year over the last couple years into this offense, but that's still a change of the play caller, so we don't really know what it's going to look like until we get to the Bills are in the opening game, so just 50 days away. So until we get to that opening game, again, when they play the Los Angeles Rams. But I think he's in a prime example. Now, based on his latest draft position, I don't know if he might be a little too rich for where I want to get him, because they're definitely in that area where maybe I would consider somebody. But if it's at the right spot, he's a guy I definitely would want on my roster that's entering his 3rd season. My second guy is going to be Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk has kind of been a guy that's flashed his talent over the last few years, and I just really love his situation. It's Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk in that offense. Obviously, they got George Kittle, but with Brandon Ayuk, I think he's going to be able to have a big year because obviously more eyes are going to be on Deebo. Now, based on what I'm hearing, it does sound like Deebo is going to get a contract extension with San Francisco. I know he's demanded his trade, but that's another thing to keep an eye on, or at least, have that in your thought process, where if Deebo doesn't get a contract extension done any time over this next month and maybe more trade rumors start to heat up, well, that's going to open up a big opportunity for Brandon Ayuk to see an uptick in targets. So he's another guy I'm willing to take a draft selection on. My third one, I'm going to go with Chase Claypool. He's got an opportunity where he is going to be Deontay Johnson and him. Now they did draft George Pickens in the NFL draft. They still got Freiermuth, but with him entering year 3, if he's able to put together everything with his talent and his attitude and get everything focused where he can be the player on the field, be a great player on the field, I think he could potentially set up to have a big year. I could see, if everything lined up right where he had a great quarterback I could trust, I could definitely see him sliding up to that number 5 spot with his talent. But that is one thing I'm kind of worried about. Is it going to be Mitch Trubisky? Is it going to be Kenny Pickett? Now, I definitely think Pickett has some qualities where he can be a low-end starter, maybe up to a mid-end starter in this league. But I just don't know if I trust the quarterback situation with Chase Claypool, so that's why I didn't put him at my number 5 spot. But with that being said, he's entering year 3. If he's up on the board, I'm definitely going to lean towards selecting him over other wide receivers. The other guy I'm looking at, Darnell Mooney. Obviously, everybody knows the Chicago Bears have the absolute worst wide receiver room in the league. Yeah, probably. It's between them and Atlanta Falcons. But with that being said, obviously that means more opportunity. He's been a player that's been fantasy relevant over the last 3 years. I think he's tied to a Justin Fields. Justin Fields, I think of the world of him, I still think he has the talent to be a quality NFL, a potential star quarterback in the league. It's just that I don't know if I trust that offense completely right now. I got to see what that offensive line looks like. He doesn't have help in the wide receiver room, where if he ends up being the true lead dog in that wide receiver corps, where he can pull away, have others help pull away double coverage. So I just don't know if I trust the offense. But at the end of the day, he's a year 3 wide receiver that's entering a situation where he can basically dominate the target share, and he can end up being like a wide receiver 2 for you if everything comes together for him in his 3rd season. My other guy on this list I'm willing to take a draft selection on, I'm going with Donovan Peoples-Jones up there in Cleveland. The reason why is opportunity, right? They did bring in Amari Cooper, so obviously Amari Cooper is going to be the lead dog in that wide receiver room. But other than that, they did draft David Bell. They did draft him this past draft, but with that being said, there's not really much competition. There are a handful of guys that can be role players, but Donovan Peoples-Jones has the body type and the talent where if he puts it all together, he can be a starting wide receiver in that roster opposite of Amari Cooper and be the guy that dominates, that's like second in the targets within the offense. Now, obviously, we got to see what happens with the Deshaun Watson suspension. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Some days you hear it's going to be a full year. Some days you're going to hear it's 8. Lately, it seems like all the buzz is going to be like an 8-game suspension based on that. But we'll have to see. But, when Deshaun's out, sounds like it's going to be Jacoby Brissett. So that kind of scares you away from Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's definitely a guy where if I draft him, I probably don't. He's going to be, where he's going in drafts. You're not going to, it's not like you're drafting him to be in your starting lineup. You're going to be drafting him to be one of your bench guys. And he's one of those guys where I view it as, if I can just hold on to him on my bench, and then if Watson is back, like after the half point of the year, man, he could definitely have a blow-up type of year. But and regardless if you take the off the field issues, at the end of the day, Deshaun's a really good quarterback. So it's a situation where Donovan Peoples-Jones could be a guy that helps you get into the close into the playoffs at the back end of the year. My third guy kind of a spoiler alert earlier when I was talking about Justin Jefferson, is KJ Osborne. KJ Osborne really came along in his 2nd year last year. He was fantasy relevant at times. I know I had him on a couple rosters at points, and especially during those bye weeks, I was able to kind of lean on him. And he's a guy that basically solidified his role as the 3rd wide receiver on that Vikings depth chart behind Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And the reason why I'm willing to take a draft selection on him is, A, what if injuries happen, right? Again, he's going to be a guy you draft to be on your bench. So what if injuries happen? But then, like I mentioned earlier about Justin Jefferson, you got Kevin McConnell coming over from the Rams. So look how many people, wide receivers, that offense was able to support last year. Pre-Odell, it was Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and like Van Jefferson, right? And then when Odell signed there, they were going to use all those guys, but then Robert Woods got hurt. But then they went on to use Cooper Kupp, Odell, and Van Jefferson plus others. So KJ Osborne is a guy that's going to be able to give you some production. And then if there's if there's an injury or anything like that, all of a sudden you got a guy that maybe you can insert into your starting lineup. And the last guy I'm willing to use my draft selection is the guy I just talked about, right? Van Jefferson, who's kind of been like behind the scenes because like all the Rams keep on bringing in wide receivers, and he's a guy I fell in love with when I was in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So I've been such a huge fan. So I'm definitely willing to take his draft selection on him on my bench and see how his role unfolds in year 3. Now he's tied to Sean McVay, he's tied to Matthew Stafford. Now there's obviously he's got to deal with Cooper Kupp in the offense. They sign Allen Robinson, but he can be that third wide receiver. And like I kind of mentioned with KJ Osborne, if anything happens to Kupp, if anything happens to Allen Robertson, that just presents a great opportunity for Van Jefferson to really put up some great production within Sean McVay's offense. Now the next tier of guys is the last tier where I'm gonna kind of quickly run over these guys because again, these are guys that you're probably not gonna like. Nobody's gonna really leave a draft with these guys. Maybe if you you're like I said, like a 14 plus team league, these are names for you to watch like if you're in a deep league, or these are names to watch like if it's like week 3 and one of the wide receivers get hurt. And there are a couple guys honestly on this list where you might end up drafting them come like late August just because the opportunity just presented themselves and you want to take a chance on it. Or maybe you kind of grab them off your waivers after week 1 type of situation. So going over these names really quick, Bryan Edwards, he's a guy that was on the Raiders roster for the first 2 seasons, and then this past offseason they traded him to Atlanta. Like I said earlier, Atlanta's got one of the worst wide receiving rooms in the league. They drafted Drake London with their first round pick. Calvin Ridley is suspended for the whole year, so this is a great opportunity where Bryan Edwards is able to put it all together with his talent. He could see a significant role where he can help out somebody on a fantasy football roster, maybe move up to that wide receiver 3 status, but at least be a bench guy that can help you out when we get to the bye weeks. The next 2 names I'm actually going to talk about together. That's Devin Duvernay and James Prochet. They are, if anybody doesn't know where they're at, they're up there in Baltimore with the Ravens. Now, as of right now, the Ravens, they don't really have much talent. Proven talent in that wide receiver room. Now they have their first round pick from last year, Rashad Bateman, who's right now set to be the lead dog in that room with them trading Hollywood Brown out to the Cardinals. So there's a lot of opportunities for that guys in that wide receiver room to grab more of a larger role this upcoming season. Now they are in a run-heavy offense with Lamar, but I still think maybe one of these guys can maybe emerge and have be a decent bench guy that you can start sliding in come the bye week. Now Devin Duvernay I've tweeted about him a lot the last couple years. They have used him as a gadget player. He can do some rushing and stuff. He's a guy I'm kind of interested to see if they give more of a larger role this year with him entering his 3rd season. James Prochet's got some nice size to him and maybe offer a bigger target for Lamar Jackson. So again, these are guys maybe watch if Baltimore doesn't add another wide receiver between now and the season, I'm watching to see how those guys are doing in training camp and in the preseason games and see if maybe they're going to have an opportunity to have a good role in the offense. The next guy I'll run over really quick is Freddie Swain. He basically was the 3rd wide receiver on the Seattle Seahawks last year. He was able to produce in some games and be a fantasy relevant player. Now this year, I don't know if I would trust it without Russell Wilson. As of right now, it's just Geno Smith and Drew Lock, so I'm not really trusting that situation. Obviously, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are going to be the dominating guys, but a couple things. There's been rumors about Tyler Lockett being potentially traded at some point, and then DK Metcalf's having a contract extension dispute right now. I know he held himself out of mini camp, so if they're not able to get a deal done, maybe he gets traded away, and that can offer more of an opportunity for Freddie Swain, despite how bad of a quarterback situation they have there in Seattle. Denzel Mims, man, this is something I just put him on there just because of his potential. I don't know if there's going to be a really thing that emerges with the guy. He has not been able to even really get on the field, even though he had a great opportunity in his first 2 years. He's still a guy that got drafted on day 2 of the draft. They got a crowded wide receiver room, but I did hear some rumblings that he's been having a good offseason program. So do keep an eye on that and see if Zach Wilson maybe develops some chemistry with him. And again, these are guys I'm saying just keep an eye on. I don't think you should definitely draft him. Just keep an eye on their situation and see if they can be a guy that you could throw on your bench and use during the bye weeks, or a guy that maybe emerges and helps you win some games this year. The next guy you might recognize, his name is Marquez Callaway. He was definitely fantasy relevant with how many injuries that wide receiver room had there in New Orleans last year. But now he's in a crowded room, so that's why I say he's a guy to watch unfold. They got Jarvis Landry there now. We'll have to see if Michael Thomas is ready to play, and they drafted Chris Olave. Those are their top 3 wide receivers, so that's why I wouldn't waste a pick on Marquez Callaway. But Jarvis Landry hasn't been the most healthiest wide receiver. Neither has Michael Thomas. We honestly don't know where he is in his rehab. It seems like there's always something about his ankle. And then Chris Olave is a rookie wide receiver, and sometimes, like I said earlier at the beginning of this video, sometimes rookie wide receivers do need some time to develop. So if anything happens, all of a sudden Marquez Callaway can be a fantasy relevant wide receiver like he was last year. So if anything happens with those New Orleans top 3 wide receivers, that's a guy I'm looking at right away to get off the waivers this year. Now this next guy, everybody's gonna laugh. Jalen Reagor, everybody's calling him a bust, but I don't know if he's a bust. Now he definitely hasn't lived up to his talent, because I thought he was more of a day 2 wide receiver, and I just think it was more of a bust decision by Philadelphia. I mean, they did draft him over Justin Jefferson. They are the ones that put Jalen Reagor in the situation, but with that being said, Jalen Reagor did not capitalize on the opportunity that he has, and he's just a guy that's behind the scenes, right? They got A.J. Brown, they got Devontae Smith, but what if injuries happen, or what if he gets traded, right? Maybe if he gets traded to Atlanta, maybe he gets traded to Chicago. Sometimes sometimes a change of scenery can help out a player's situation for them to kind of get their career back on track. Is it going to happen with Jalen Reagor? I'm not sure. Again, this is why he's in a guy to watch, see if his role unfolds, because at the end of the day, he's a first-round pick. And going back to something I mentioned earlier, same team, Nelson Aguilar, right? Probably went too higher than he should have, right? He probably shouldn't have been. At the end of the day, Nelson Aguilar shouldn't have been a first-round pick. But in his third, even though he was considered a bust in his first 2 years, he had that huge year 3 for Philadelphia. Maybe the same thing happens for Jalen Reagor. Next on the list, Quintez Cephas. He's a guy I've always liked because he's a former Wisconsin Badger. He's with the Detroit Lions, so I don't necessarily love the situation with Jared Goff. But they also did bring in guys like DJ Chark. They drafted Jamison Williams, but here's the thing: Jamison Williams is coming off a torn ACL. Obviously, they don't want to rush him back anytime soon. He probably has. I mean, you gotta think he has some type of chemistry with Jared Goff. He was fantasy relevant at points last year, and if he can carve himself out a larger role this year, he's definitely a guy that can be on your bench and help you out throughout the season. Now this next one, I'm probably going to butcher part of his last name, but Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. This is the guy I put him on the list because it's pure opportunity. He's a wide receiver with the Titans. When Julio was hurt last year, he was kind of basically the most consistent wide receiver outside of A.J. Brown. Then obviously A.J. Brown got traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. They did bring in Robert Woods. They did draft Treylon Burks. But there has been those reports about Treylon Burks. I want to see how he performs in camp. I'm not really worried about Treylon Burks at this point. But with that being said, if Treylon Burks is having his rookie struggles like it was reported back earlier in the summer, if Robert Woods sounds like he is pretty much back from his injury, but he is an older veteran coming off an injury, so he's gonna have to get underneath his feet as well once the real games get going. So this is an opportunity where Westbrook-Ikhine can maybe step up his level of play. Maybe he can become a fantasy relevant wide receiver because there's plenty of opportunity for somebody to do that with the Titans offense. And then lastly is KJ Hamler, a guy I kind of mentioned earlier when I was talking about Jerry Jeudy. He's more of a small speedster type of guy, but he's got a lot of talent. He's with Russell Wilson, and if all of a sudden, if Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, and Cortland Sutton, if one or two of those guys start to get hurt, KJ Hamler's the guy I'm going to take a look at the waivers throughout the season. Again, the guys I just went over, I'm not saying go draft those guys. Maybe they end up making themselves draft worthy by the time you do your draft through a good training camp and preseason. But those are guys maybe to watch if injuries happen or if situation changes for them. So yeah, guys, that is my first video back. Oh, I can't believe I got all the way through that without messing up. I know there's definitely some ums and this and that. I wasn't perfect in my first return. But I definitely am excited to be back to creating content for my YouTube channel. A little update too, guys, with me being having a more I'm at a management level at my day job, so I just don't have the time where I can fully commit to like the type of video content I did last year. So I think what I'm going to end up doing this year, just to kind of give everybody an update, I'm going to be writing for Colts Wire like I did last year. I think I'm going to make more of my YouTube content, more fantasy football content. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And then as far as like my NFL predictions, I know I'm really good at it. I mean, I did say the Bengals were going to win their division in my last year, but I think I'm going to maybe turn to like the Instagram Reels. I think I'm finally going to listen to my good friend Eric and download TikTok and start creating content on there. Do some stuff on Twitter. As far as like my NFL predictions, game predictions, I'm maybe just going to be doing little short videos or at least tweeting stuff out. I just, let me just say this. The views I was getting on those Saturday videos doesn't seem like that should be the best route, and it seems like everybody loves my fantasy football content. So I'm gonna turn my YouTube channel be focused on fantasy football content. So with that being said, I'm not sure what exactly my topic will be on my next video, but I want to hear back from my audience, because if you are taking your time out to listen to my content, I want to be able to provide the content that you're searching for. So we have drafts coming up. Is there anything that you guys want to hear? Do you want to hear about maybe handcuff running backs, maybe defenses? Do you want to hear my quarterback rankings? Do you want to hear me do all my rankings over the next couple weeks? I want to hear back from you guys, so get in my comments. I would love to hear some suggestions as far as topics I could cover in fantasy football as we get closer to the season, as more drafts start to happen over this next 4 to 6 weeks. So I want to hear from you guys. Other than that, I just want to reiterate, I'm happy to be back. I'm going to be back. So let's go ahead. Let's try to grow this channel this year, right? So go tell a friend. If this is your first time watching the video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to head out of here. Peace out, guys. I hope you enjoy your day.